Beta Sorority Incorporated. And she also serves on the board of governors for LifeWorks, which many of you probably heard of, a local nonprofit whose mission is to end youth homelessness in our community. And very importantly, not only is she a lifelong Texan, having been born and raised in San Antonio, but she is also a Longhorn. She got her bachelor's of business administration just down the way at the Macomb School. So I'm so happy and honored to have Director Kerri Lang join us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And how would you prefer to go? Can students, if they have questions, should they put up their hands, or would you rather hold questions until the end?
You can ask questions whenever you want. I want this to be a conversation. I do have slides to kind of walk us through what the budget is and what we do, but this definitely can be a conversation where you all stop me, ask for clarification. Let's talk. Let's talk about the city's budget.
And should we kill some more lights so people can better see the screen, or what do we think? Is it okay? Okay, let's okay.
Okay. I usually like to walk around a little bit more, but because I have to do the tap, I'll stay close over here. But I am excited to be here. This is probably my 4th or 5th time speaking to this class, and it's just been fun to hear your conversations and your thoughts, and to just kind of talk through what the city's budget is. And it's what I do pretty much every day. I tell somebody about the budget, how we've been.
Sorry, you got one. Good. Okay, good.
How it was created, and what we do after it's created. So I always start talking about the budget process and talking about the calendar. I tell everybody what this calendar is and how we get through the budget process. Usually as staff, my office starts in November to start trying to prepare for the next year. We do a budget kickoff with the city's departments to talk about what we're going to do internally in January. And then this year in particular, or for fiscal year 26 in particular, the city manager, because this was his first full budget cycle, he started doing town halls in February and March, trying to hear from people what the community wanted the budget to look like. We have over 80 boards and commissions in the city. And so those boards and commissions provide their recommendations. They have to get them to us by March 31st. That gives us a chance as department and staff to review their recommendations, analyze them, say whether we agree or not agree, or what it would take to implement those recommendations. In April, we start talking about the budget on a high level, doing a 5-year financial forecast where we talk through what we think our revenue is going to look like over the next 5 years, what expenditure growth is going to look like. We focus on the general fund throughout most of this conversation, but just know that the city has several enterprise departments that we talk through what their projections are. But if you ever pay attention to council and to what is happening during the budget cycle, about 85% of the conversation is on the general fund. So once we talk about the financial forecast and give that high-level overview, then we go into what we call budget creation, the proposed budget creation. And so we go away for about 3 months, hone in on what that revenue looks like for the next year, and the city manager presents his budget mid-July. And then we do the race for the horses, where we are over a 4-week period, 4 to 6 week period, we're talking to community, we're talking to council, there are budget work sessions. We kind of go through and talk through the details of the city manager's proposed budget for them to approve in mid-August for a budget that starts October 1. Now, it's important to kind of think through that because it's a lot of information that we talk about in the budget. And I'll kind of go through all the information that are a high level of what's included in the budget. But most of the conversation, we're trying to make sure everyone in the community understands what's in a $6.3 billion operating budget, $4.4 billion spending plan for capital in 4 weeks. So it's a lot of things that's going on during that time. Every year in budget is something different. There are challenges that pop up every year that makes the cycle a little bit different each year. This year in particular, and probably the last 2 years, we've seen revenue shortfalls. And those revenue shortfalls are primarily on the sales tax revenue side. As the economy kind of constricts and declines, you will see that impact on our revenue for the general fund. Now, that's important because that is our second largest revenue source for the general fund. And so as we're creating the budget, looking at the general fund budget, thinking about how we project the revenue to grow over the next 1 or 2 years, then how our sales tax are looking makes a big difference in that. When we presented the forecast in April of this year, because of those sales tax projections, we had a $33 million deficit for the general fund. And so that's been part of our main conversations through the last several months on what are we going to do to address that deficit. Another big impact for this particular budget are federal and state reductions. We have a number of grants, particularly in our health department, that were beginning in March, February and March, we began to get notices that those grants would not be continued or they would be reduced. And those are for major programs. Those are for things like our TB clinic, our HIV clinics and programs. So all these programs that have been baseline programs for the city for years, we're looking at what will happen to those programs with those federal and state reductions. And then the other thing that you all probably have heard a little bit about over the last several weeks is a tax rate election. Beginning in the spring, council started talking about, actually beginning last year, council started talking about what do we need to do to think about whether or not we want a tax rate election based on the projected growth in our costs and the reduction in revenue that we're anticipating. And so that this year in particular became a subset of us preparing a budget. So we prepared a proposed budget, which takes us, just to do our baseline proposed budget, takes us about 6 weeks to get all that document together. The day that we presented the proposed budget, we had to finalize and put together a potential package or scenarios for council by that Friday after we presented the budget. And so my team and I, we were already running on some fumes trying to get the proposed budget done, then switching over and doing an immediate shift, thinking through all the things that could be considered for a tax rate election and presenting that to council in the couple of days after we presented the budget. Along with that, these are just some of the legislative actions that the state has taken that impacts some of the challenges that we have in our budget. The first one, SB2, it was passed in 2019. That reduced the property tax revenue, the increase to 3.5%. It used to be at 8% growth. That 3.5% growth is a challenge because year over year, our expenditures, personnel, contracts, health insurance, they grow about 4.2% a year. And so if our largest revenue source, which is property tax revenue, only grows at 3.5%, I just mentioned how sales tax is volatile, and so it can decline any year. And then the other revenue that we have maybe grows at 1%. So that particular bill in 2019, it causes some of the constraints that we have in our budget. Yes, sir.
Did the state provide any sort of reasoning behind why it's 3.5%, which is like under the normal inflationary rate?
No. The state has consistently said they are trying to do tax relief for the citizens of Texas. That has been their charge every time that they've looked at it. This year, they were looking at reducing it even further to 2.5%. There was one bill that was proposed that was a 1% increase. And so they don't really give us a lot of reasons why, but they say it under the guise of they're trying to do tax relief for Texans. And during that time, even we testify every year that they talk about doing restrictions on property tax. And we testified and told them what kind of restrictions that would do for the city, for most large municipalities, and what our costs are. Now, if you think about our budgets, most government budgets are 80 to 90% personnel. So this the people doing the work. And so when you make those restrictions, it looks like well, maybe we won't be able to give raises to our employees. And that's important because we often don't pay as well as the private sector. And so trying to get people who are the cream of the crop and we're not able to give increases and things like that, that's some of the challenges that we've seen. When that passed in 2019, my now boss, the previous budget officer, he began saying that with this change, we're going to start seeing deficits beginning in 2022, I think was the impact, because even though it passed in 2019, it didn't go into effect until 2021. And so we started predicting deficits beginning in 22 when we did our 5-year forecast. And I'll go through several things happened. COVID. With COVID, Austin actually had everybody moving here. And so our sales tax numbers went high. And so we didn't really see that impact until last year. We started seeing the impact a little bit more. There were several bills that was created, and they were created jointly with our retirement systems. The city has 3 retirement systems: the police retirement system, the City of Austin employee retirement system, and the fire retirement system. We began with the police in 2021 to fundamentally change the structure of that retirement system, made it 2-tiered, allowed us to have more flexibility as far as how it is funded. And then we copied what we did with the police, with the employee retirement system in 2023, and then this year, the last one, we changed the fire retirement system. And that's really important because before those reforms had taken place, the city had been downgraded by one of our bonding agencies because they were worried so much about our projections for our retirement system. Those changes this year, we were upgraded back to AAA with all the bonding agencies, and so we are one of the few cities across the nation that have AAA ratings. And so then HB 1900, that was passed in 2021. Right after the city, and we call this the Austin bill because it is for cities over 250, but Austin was the only major city in Texas that started a defunding police or reimagining police effort after 2020 when the George Floyd murders happened, and the city's response and the city's at the time, the council's goal was to restructure how we did policing. After that year in 2021, the legislation came in and said, if you defund police, you can lose your sales tax revenue, you'll lose your electricity revenue, you'll lose portions of your city's annexation. So there are a number of changes that will happen if the police department's budget reduces over the previous fiscal year. That's really important because police makes up about 35–40% of our general fund budget. So when you think about the impacts of that, it has a lot of bearing on how we budget in the general fund going forward. So let's talk through some highlights. This is the city's overall budget, $6.3 billion. Yes?
HB is House bill, SB is Senate bill?
Yes.
And then, so House bill is federal, and state bill, or Senate bill is state?
This is all state.
All
The state house, the state senate.
It's just whether the bill originated in the House or the Senate.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious with the bond rating agencies, like how much the difference between particular ratings can kind of influence cities' like fiscal policy, their outlooks, and also the difference between if you're rated like AAA versus maybe AA or something. Like how far flung is like do those bonds become? Is it do they go across the country? Is it regional, other parts of the state? You know?
So what I do know, because that's getting a little bit out my wheelhouse, because there's a finance director who does that, but the rating agencies are nationwide, and so the impact is based on how they sell our bonds, in the market. And so it's not restricted to the region or the state, it's what the market looks like. I don't know the differences between AAA and AA or AAA minus, I think is what we ended up. I just know that when we sell, of course, it's a higher interest for when we sell, depending on what our ratings are. Even when we were downgraded to, we went from AAA to AA in that particular one, we still had very good, that's still a very good rating for a city. There are some cities that are A or A minus, and so we were still pretty good overall, so our cost did not increase much, but it was an increase on those bonds that we had out when we were trying to call on them. Yeah.
I guess if you're not able to answer this, sort of like, is the difference between ratings like tenths of a percent? Is it?
Oh,
and how much does that turn into in terms of interest that you're paying out, like interest that you're able to kind of calculate for?
Yeah, I don't know that detail. We have a treasurer who manages that, and the way that we work together is that she looks at what those costs are and then helps us create what our debt service rate is going to be on the property tax. And so there's a whole team that kind of digs into that, looks at when we're selling the bonds, what those rates are, working with the rating agencies. That's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but send a note, and then I can see if I could get someone to answer that question, okay?
Yeah,
so when you look at the city's overall budget, every city's budget is going to be different. We are $6.3 billion, but we own our utility. So Austin Energy is a major part of that budget. Our water department is a major part of that budget. And we have several other enterprise departments that a lot of cities typically don't have. Some cities don't own their convention centers. Usually owned, it could be privately or by a nonprofit. Our airport, the municipally owned airport for a major airport is not normal for most cities. Some cities have smaller regional airports, but not a large airport like Austin. Our transportation public works, that's a little bit different. That's sometimes in the general fund. Most cities, you'll see that in the general fund. That is a separate department, an enterprise department. Austin Resource Recovery, that's our fancy way of saying solid waste. And then our Development Services Department, that is an outside enterprise fund. Some of those are internal, yes.
Would you mind just explaining to everyone what an enterprise fund or enterprise
Sure.
department means?
Enterprise funds are funds that are, they are organizations or departments that have to create revenue based off of fees. They do not rely on property taxes or sales tax or any other taxing entity. It's just on their fees. So when you look at your energy bill, you see your fees for Austin Energy, their rate per usage. You see your water bill. You see the transportation user fee. That covers transportation public works. Clean community fee. That covers our development services code and resource recovery. You also see your trash cart. So those are all enterprise departments. Convention Center is enterprise. It is funded primarily through hotel occupancy tax, as well as fees for renting the convention center. Aviation, all of their fees stay within the airport, within the fences of the airport. So when you see the cost of the airport, the revenue that the airport generates, it does nothing to impact the cost or the expenses of the city. It all has to stay within the fences of the airport based on federal law.
The Austin Energy, obviously a very significant part of the budget. Is any of that, like, it seems larger than I would expect. Is that from like lagging effects from like Winter Storm Uri, or is it the data centers that are coming on, or is it always that?
It's always been one of the largest departments in the city. If you think about the service area that Austin Energy has, and yes, primarily the city, but they have some smaller entities that they provide energy for, as well as the number of employees that they have. I believe they have about 1,200 employees. They're one of our biggest departments because of the services that they provide. Now, with energy and water in particular, as our two utilities, they do provide a transfer into the general fund. Because as municipal owned, they don't have the same stakeholder payments and things like that if they were a private owned. And so they provide some of that interest, and they don't pay taxes. And so they provide some of that to support the general fund. I always got to talk about internal services. I almost missed it. That's all of us that make the city run. That is HR, finance, the city manager's office, the lawyers, our fleet and mobility services, facilities management. So all the services that we help to support all those things, that's in the internal services option. This is the general fund. When we think about the general fund, we usually want to talk about the general fund from a revenue and expenses perspective. And so this inner circle talks about all of the revenue. As you see, property tax is our largest revenue source. Sales tax is our second largest. We've talked about how much this is stable. We know how much property taxes we're going to get year over year. This sales tax is what is most volatile. And then our utility transfers that I just mentioned from energy and water. The other revenue is stuff like interest earnings. If you use parks and recreations, the fees associated with that. If you need to be transported by the ambulance, EMS fees, that's in the other revenue sources. That grows about 1%, 1.5% a year, so that's a very slow growing revenue source because those revenue sources, anything that we charge for fees and for service fees, they cannot exceed the cost of service. And so when you use a recreation program, we have to determine what the cost of service is for that program, and we can only charge you at cost of service or below. And so when you look at our revenue sources here, as sales tax, as that changes, it puts more pressure on property tax to provide for the services that we have in place. And then when you look at the services that we do provide, we do this chart this way because we want to really show that once you pay for police, fire, and EMS, you're using up all of the property tax revenue and about 67% of the sales tax revenue to cover those core services. That leaves very little for our other services across the city. That leaves little for public health, PART, libraries. All of the more community or social services functions are resulting in the rest of those dollars that are available. Any questions about this loveliness?
Is the Austin Public Health money, is that money that the city is contributing to Central Health?
No.
No.
So we are separate from Central Health. Public Health Central Health is more focused on direct services, direct care. Public Health is for public health of the city, looking at disease surveillance and things like that. Also looking at human services, so basic needs, and we have WIC, and we have all these different human services programs as well.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Utility transfers, just like when you move around in Austin?
No, that is the Austin Water and Austin Energy. They transfer in. So Austin Energy is 12% of an average of their previous 3 years' revenue, and then Austin Water is 8%. And so they transfer that into the general fund to help fund the operations of the general fund.
It's sort of like, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but my understanding is if they were privately owned, they would be earning a profit, but because they're publicly owned, rather than turning a profit, they essentially contribute some of what would be the profit margin back into the city's operations.
Correct.
What impact have you all seen on the property taxes regarding the increase in property values that have been happening in Austin in the past few years? Like, have you seen an increase in the percentage or increase in revenues because of that?
So the only we have a 3.5% revenue cap on property taxes. So when you look at the market value of properties, especially for homesteads, even if your market value has doubled or tripled, we can only go up 10% on the assessed value of your home. And so your property taxes are calculated based on your assessed value, not on your market value. And so with the assessed value, it can only increase 10%, but the overall city revenue can only grow 3.5%. So what that means is as your individual home increases, you'll only see a 10%, no more than a 10% increase on the value, on your taxes. However, the overall city, let me back that up. You'll see only a 10% increase on the value, which is what we use to calculate your taxes. However, we can only increase the taxes up to 3.5%. And so what will happen is homesteads usually don't get as much of an increase, but if it is a rental property or commercial property, they get the brunt of the increase that happens because of the market value increases.
Is that the same case if property redevelops? For example, like a single home detached like becomes an apartment building, do you get
So on new construction, we get the total value of the new construction. So we're held harmless on that, and then the next year it's only a 3.5% increase.
okay.
So any new construction we get, so when we talk about our proposed property tax revenue, we'll talk about the 3.5% growth, and then we'll say, but there is $2.3 billion of new construction, which goes to our tax base.
Okay. And have you seen that because of, I mean, there's been a lot of redevelopment in Austin for the past, have y'all seen?
So what our revenue guru says is if the cranes are up, we've already counted it. And so once you see cranes, we've already counted that revenue base. And so we saw in 25, we saw $5.5 billion, which is the largest that we've seen. We usually go around 2.3, 2.5 billion is the usual increases. And we're starting to see some decline in our development.
With the assessed value for properties, is it, because of the assessed value can only increase 10%, does that mean that to meet the 3.5% like actual tax that you're collecting, is it a case of like kind of assessing to a certain amount every, like, because I know home assessments can usually be a little bit different than what they would be for like market prices because you're trying to keep it within a certain range to tax a certain amount. Is it kind of dialing in those numbers, or is the homeowner, because of, or property owner, because of the way that assessed value can rise faster than tax revenue, like are they basically capturing value? And does that change development patterns at all?
It doesn't change development patterns, and when I say the city can raise 3.5%, that's overall. And so it's just a shift on who pays for it. And typically what will happen is council will provide some relief to homeowners. They have the max exemption, 20% exemption. Every year in May and June, the council increases the senior and disabled exemption. So to try to hold those groups harmless for tax increases. And so all that does is shift the burden to commercial. So that means that commercial owners, whether it is commercial residential or commercial properties, businesses, they will see a brunt of those changes because their value is also looked at based on the market. They don't get those same exemptions.
So just kind of like on that, so how does it work then for kind of like mixed use development? Do you count that as a commercial development in terms of taxes, or is it just?
So mixed use is, there's a portion of it that's considered commercial. Actually, it's all commercial because it's all rental property. Mm-hmm. And so it is all considered commercial, unless if it's a condo with mixed use, then each individual parcel has its own tax, and then the overall, the business portion has a tax. So it just depends on the type of mixed use that it is.
If I understand correctly, the city receives more taxes from commercial, if I understand correctly.
The burden shifts. So it just depends on the makeup each year. And so, for example, if a homestead becomes a rental property, then the market value will be what is used to assess the taxes for that. Previously, it was a homestead, and so they had a little bit less market value. Okay. Clear as mud, right?
It's really
Clear as
really
mud.
complicated.
So This is just some of the investments that were made in the budget document, or in the budget this year. And we just want to give a highlight of what kinds of investments were made. There are two things that you can look at. You can look at the budget document. I heard you were charged with reading all of, or a portion of that 1,400-page document.
I said to spend 10 minutes skimming it. Just let the record reflect.
It is, that budget in brief gives a lot of information in those first 75 to 100 pages. That gives a lot of information about the overall. The rest of the budget is the details. But you can also look at, because this was a budget that was approved with a property tax rate higher than the 3.5%, then there's a ballot website out there. It's called Ballot Propositions. It's part of the city's website, where you can get a list of all the investments that are new investments that are considered in the approved budget. And it's part of the consideration for the tax rate election that's happening now.
So when it comes to the state propositions, there are a lot of state propositions on doing tax exemptions this year. If any of those pass, how do they affect the city, and how does the city prepare for them?
So there are no state propositions that are going to directly affect cities.
Okay.
Those did not make it. They didn't make it through. Most of the exemptions affect the school districts, and so there are several school districts that are already challenged, and so they'll probably continue with some of those challenges. Yeah. And so some of the investments, the EMS, 22 new positions, that includes new units, basic life units, as well as mental health response, our homeless strategies and operations. A number of investments focused on that, where it was new shelters or funding to support new shelters, $12 million for rapid rehousing. So there's a number of different efforts that were included that are usually services that are provided through contracts. Parks and Recreation, that has been a big topic for the last couple of years. These 60 new employees or positions would be for grounds and maintenance needs, so that's stuff like cleaning up Zilker or Auditorium Shores or the community parks around the city. And then aviation, we wanted to make sure we talked about, at least one enterprise in this slide. Aviation is going through their redevelopment of the airport, and so a lot of the funding that you're seeing for them is to help with some of the operations of the new development that they're creating. When we're building the budget, we always have a conversation on what the impact is of those rates or fees that we talked about from the enterprise departments that only rely on rates and fees. And so this shows how much a typical home monthly bill is, and it depends on the rate to see what the typical is. So you see Austin Energy is based on 860 kilowatts of usage. Transportation, that is per single family home. There are a number of transportation user fees depending on the account. And then ARR is based on the 64-gallon cart. So you can just kind of look and see what the changes are year over year based on the increases to your rates and fees. We also show on the website what we call a typical rate payer that puts all the rates and fee changes year over year, as well as the increase to the property tax bill. So this is the general fund, with assuming that the voter approval rate is what we end up with. So we're going to show you two slides. If the Proposition Q does not pass, then the general fund's projections for the next 5 years looks like this. As I mentioned, our expenses grow. They grow about 4%. Our revenue with this is a 3.5 to 3.9% growth. And so you'll see that we are balanced for the first 2 years with the city manager. When the city manager came here last year, he wanted us to start balancing 2 years. And with that balancing, there are a number of cuts that we would have to make in 27 to make it balanced. For example, we have about $16 million of social service contracts, basic need contracts that we have to cut in 27. We have No employee increases for 27. We are reducing funds or our transfers for things like our facility maintenance. We have a capital rehab fund that helps with the ongoing maintenance of our city facilities. We'd have to cut some of those transfers in order to balance in fiscal year 27. And then we start seeing deficits in the out years. We show what the reserve ratio is because that's an ongoing conversation we have with council. Our reserves is our savings or insurance plan. The city is self-insured. And so when Winter Storm Uri happens and we have to make some, pay out some things or address the damage that happens, it comes from our reserves. When this year in particular, when the economy goes down, we have a budget stabilization reserve. We use some of those dollars to help us fund the operations for the year. And so our reserve policy is at 17%. That's what we strive to get. But you see here, assuming that we stay with the voter approval rate, we stay below our reserve policy until the last year, but our deficit is the highest at $22.7 million.
It says reserve ratio. Is that like calculated, like subtracting like you're taking into account like that deficit that you're getting? Like, is it a subtraction or is it just like 16.6% out of like savings out of the total? How does that
Our reserves have to be 17% of our general fund operating budget. So when you look at a $1.4 billion of budget, we need a 17% reserve, which is about 227 million, I think, is what the reserves is for that. And so we look at our total operating growth, and then 17%. 8% is for emergency reserve, and then 6% is, 8% is for emergency reserve. Is that right? And 9% is for stabilization.
It's essentially 2 months worth of spending,
Yes.
right? So it's kind of like in your household budget, it's a good idea to have just some money in a savings account that's there in case something bad happens, and I guess that's the city's version of that, right?
Yes, and we are self-insured, so we can't call on whoever like, for example, when you need a roof, you do an insurance claim and you get a new roof. We can't do that. We have to pay for all that in-house. So if a winter storm happens, a flood happens, most of those costs come from those reserves. When COVID happened, we paid for a lot of operations out of reserves, and then we had to reimburse ourselves. Okay? So that's at the voter approval rate.
I have a question about the reserves. Didn't City Council approve of a more than 3.5% increase on property taxes to respond to the floods in like around Sandy Creek area?
No.
That was Travis County. That was
I'm
not
about
the
to say,
city
I
of
think
Austin.
that was Travis County that did that. So the state allows for local governments to increase their property taxes one time as a response to a disaster. With that increase, they have to go back down to the previous voter approval rate in the following year. So it's a one-time increase, and they have to reduce the revenue of that one-time increase. What Travis County did is they're going up to the 8% to cover the cost of that disaster.
So was that 8% that already, I don't know what their specific ratio is. Was that not sufficient enough and that's why they had to?
I don't know. I think that's a county conversation, and I don't know the intricacies of what made them decide to go to the full 8%.
But the idea is that if like something like that happened in Austin, you would be able to dig into your reserves before you have to go to those.
So, yes, and I think it depends on what the long-term impacts are. So if the response needs to be we need to just fix something quickly, but if it's an operational change that needs to happen, then that may cause the need to go to an increased rate. However, because the law requires you to reduce that one-time rate, I don't know that the city would use that mechanism in particular, or if we would go for a TRE to have the ongoing revenue to support whatever change needs to happen. I do know that the county does also have a reserve. I don't know what their percentages are or why they chose to go this route.
Yeah, in that case, I think it was basically to replace some washed out bridges, and then also I think the county had to spend a bunch of money on cleaning debris after the flood events.
Okay. So this is assuming the voter approval rate. This is what the property tax or the revenue and the general fund looks like if the tax rate election is approved. And so what this shows is that it just shores up our reserves through the life of the forecast. We are balanced through the life of the forecast. And shoring up that reserves means that because we're over in beginning in fiscal year 27, the ratio, there are more dollars that the council can use to implement ongoing expenses without changing the property tax.
Is the, two questions actually. Is the reserve reinvested so that it can build upon itself? Is it like in some sort of high yield savings account or something like that?
We can't do high yield savings accounts, but it's part of the whole cash balance that the city has. We have our treasury does all of the management of it, so it's not necessarily a high yield account, but we do earn interest on those dollars while they are in the bank.
Okay. Yeah. And secondarily, has there been any external polling to see if what the city is thinking about on the voting? Or are you just waiting for the vote to?
So there have been, I believe several council members did polling prior to approving. There's been some polling after the budget was approved. And I don't know where, as staff, we present the information. We support council's decisions and we show what the impacts are. And then, and I'm being very cautious in what I say because we have to be cautious while we're in this space not to try to influence or impact. So there's, I keep it real vanilla.
She's presenting scenarios.
Yes, yes.
Can I make a quick plug? The election is first Tuesday in November, and I believe today is the first day of early voting.
Yep.
And for those of you who are Travis County voters, if you haven't done it before, right across the way in the Flan Center, super duper convenient to vote early. It would be totally inappropriate for me as a state employee to tell you what I think about how you should vote, but I absolutely can tell you that I think you should vote.
Yep.
Regardless of how you vote. So I'm going to keep saying that. You're going to be tired of hearing me say it.
How come you're using the old logo?
Because we didn't update it. That is the only reason. And I'm going to tell my team when we get back, they call me out for not using the logo. We have our logo on almost everything else. This particular presentation, I'm going to tell on myself, we recycle it year over year because the budget doesn't change that much. But note it. It will not happen again.
The city manager did his town halls like in the spring and summer. Was this part of that presentation? Like showing like how their votes might impact this part?
No, because we didn't know. They did not call for election until later. So when the city manager gave the presentation last February and March, it did talk about what we're seeing with sales tax and the direction that the city is going with the forecast at that time. So we used the approved forecast from fiscal year 25 that did show deficits beginning in 28. No, let me see. Yeah, 28. We started seeing deficits in 28 at that time.
How do you, I mean, you're going to go into that, but like, how do you actually forecast? Like, do you expect, like, do you take into account like further development or growth, or how do you do that budgeting forecast in like 5 years?
So during forecast, it's pretty high level. So we look at what we see as projections of our property growth as far as if it's new development that we're forecasting, and then we look at that for the next year or 2 years, and then we just do the 3.5% growth on top of that, assuming that we go to 3.5% growth every year. With sales tax, we do work with an economist, and so we have a contractor economist who walks us through what's happening across the nation, what we're seeing locally. It's very interesting, though, when we're forecasting or what we're seeing now. During COVID in 21 and 22, the city's sales tax was 21% growth year over year, and we knew that we wouldn't sustain that. However, what we're seeing now is the city of Austin sales tax is flat, but surrounding cities, I don't know, Manor, Kyle, Leander, their sales tax is growing at about 7%. Our peer cities, Fort Worth, I think Dallas has pretty good sales tax. San Antonio has about a 3%. So for some reason in this space, Austin right now is seeing the least growth compared to our peer cities. That's a new place for us to be in, because historically we have been the city amongst the Texas cities who has continued to see growth in our sales tax.
And whenever you're doing this forecasting, and correct me if I'm understanding the process, I'm not understanding the process correctly,
Okay.
between city staff and council. But like, of course, like taxes is it's one tool, right, that you have to increase the money that you're getting, your revenue from the city. You have like other different, do you all advise the council, like present the data and then advise the council on how to use like different tools and like how to implement, for example, like sales tax or like property taxes, like what changes can happen to increase the budget in different areas? Is that something that happens?
We have those conversations, but we don't have that many revenue sources. So when you think about how we can generate more revenue, it's property taxes, and that depends on development and to get new revenue. Sales tax is volatile, and then we can only charge at cost of service. So we can't make extra money for the services we provide. There are restrictions on additional fees for services that taxes already pay for, so we can't charge an extra fee to generate more revenue, because that's seen as a double tax. So we don't have a lot of options for revenue sources. What we can do, and what I think the city manager has charged the executive team to do, is look at how we are doing development and what our economic development department is doing. How can we make some shifts in that regard? But that's a long-term, our planning department, that's a long-term response. Some immediate changes that we have to look at is how do we curb the cost? How do we curb how much it's costing to provide the services? With our staff being the majority of that cost, that's where the difficulty is. There's not a lot of agility that we have, because we have staff that we want to honor them being our employees.
So those conversations do happen then?
Those happen. Those begin in April. Mid-April, when we give the forecast, we say this is what we're projecting as revenue based on these factors. We usually have the economist come in and talk about what he's seeing. And then we say, and this is the projected expense growth. We assume 3.5% or 4% increases in wages. We assume that healthcare is going to increase 5 to 10%, because those costs continually increase. We look at the increased cost of technology. And so those are some of the things that we take into account when we're building that forecast. And then right now you'll see the city going through different exercises to see how we could curb those costs. Right now we're doing a huge look at our IT spend and how can we revamp that. And then we're also going to start looking at what we call our shared services, all those internal services, how we operate and how we provide human resources to the city. Can we do that differently? So there are things we're doing to try to curb the cost, because we know the revenue isn't going to be increased much. Okay? Did all that talking about operating, because that's what we talk about. How do things keep going? But we have a huge, huge capital budget for the city. You will see there have been several conversations over the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, on when are we going to do, or if we're going to do our next bond package. The bond package is how we pay for our capital projects, our streets, if we can get any new buildings for the general fund. And so right now we have for next fiscal year a $4.4 billion spending plan. But that includes the entire city. So when you look at the costs that are included in that, it's the airport. They're doing their huge renovation. The convention center and their expansion. You'll see Austin Water and Austin Energy, they have ongoing capital programs to keep all the pipes and electricity going the way that it should. And so those are the major programs that we have when we think about capital spend. You think about what the differences are. Operationals are services that we provide every day. Capital are our projects, and they're usually, sometimes they're once-in-a-lifetime projects like the airport and the convention center. Usually it's more smaller projects like how are we keeping the streets together? What kind of changes? Y'all probably see all those, all that work being done on the streets right now across the city because we had a number of mobility bonds over the last 5 to 7 years that we're trying to work through and get done. And usually what we try to do with these capital projects is coordinate those efforts. So when you see somebody, you see us working in the streets, it's usually a number of crews there because it's our Transportation and Public Works Department as well as Austin Water, if necessary, Austin Energy, to make sure we're only cutting it once and doing all the work that needs to be done at that one time. And this is just talking to the types of debt that we have for those capital programs. So I mentioned the public improvement bonds. Those are voter-approved bonds. So if a package gets put together to talk about what we're going to provide over the next 5 to 7 years, that will be voter-approved. Certificates of obligation, they are not voter-approved. And they usually are to do things, maintenance and things that we've already paid for. So if we have a building that needs HVAC or some large change, then a renovation, those are usually done with COs. Certificates of obligations, those are what we use for shorter term debt, vehicles and equipment. Years ago, I've been with the city 21 years, probably for the first 10 or 15 years, we paid for vehicles with cash. But as the changes happened and the revenue sources, we didn't have as much available, that shifted to debt for the city. Commercial paper, that is usually used by our utilities or our enterprises as well as revenue bonds. So we talked through the process. Council approves the budget. In a typical year, October 1, we get moving. And the dollars that council approved during the budget process are then appropriated. That means they're available for the departments to use. This year, they're not all available for the departments to use. We froze, and when I say we froze it, we restricted the usage of the dollars that are under consideration for the tax rate election. And so even though a $1.6 billion general fund budget was approved, departments are operating with the dollars that they already knew they had from fiscal year 25. None of the increases, none of the new positions, all of those are still locked down in the system. Once we understand what the results are of the tax rate election, those things will either be opened up or we'll delete them from the system.
I come from the federal government, so like there's a big idea on policy of use or lose. Is that also a local government thing?
It is. You have your annual appropriation, and you should budget based on, you should spend based on what that appropriation is. We ask for departments to give us their current year estimate during the budget process, and so they have to tell us by June what they think their spend is going to be for the rest of the year, how much savings they're going to generate, and then we use that to create the budget. We're trying to get departments to do a better job of spending throughout the year so they don't have this bucket that they're trying to hurry up and spend at the end of the year, but it very much is, that appropriation goes away at the end of the fiscal year. So once we get through budget development, then that's when the procurement piece starts. That's when once departments have their budgets approved, then they start working to create contracts, hire positions, all the things that's needed to do to get to the service delivery piece. And so all those things that you see happen year over year is because it's already in the incremental budget that's in place. When they get new funding on a typical year, not a TRE year, October 1, most departments are going head first into, let's start the hiring process for these new positions. Let's start getting contracts approved by council. And so you'll see all that take place. And some people don't understand that there's that lag that happens. Council approves the budget in August. They don't get authority to start spending until October. It can take 3 months or so to get a person hired or to get the dollars out to the street so that the services actually start. I think that's it. Thank y'all. Any more questions?
I guess it was paper by mobility bond, but how's Project Connect impacting, or like the cap and stitch? I know that's still kind of ongoing.
So Project Connect is not mobility bonds. That was a TRE that was done in 2020, I believe. And so there is an increase, a portion of the tax rate that we contract with Austin Transit ATP.
Partnership.
Thank you. Austin Transit Partnership, we partner with them, and so they get a portion of that tax rate. City collects the taxes in their contract with them. They get a portion of it to implement Project Connect. So it's completely managed and operated by ATP, but that's part of the tax rate. That's part of the property taxes. Cap and stitch, that is an ongoing conversation. We did lose, I believe, the $105 million funding from the federal government. And so now that is part of the bond conversation. Will there be new federal dollars available? We're searching, looking for that as a possibility. Will it be considered as part of the next bond package? That is also part of the possibility. Still part of the conversation.
And the next bond package is being contemplated for the 2026 election, is that correct?
Currently, it's being contemplated for the 2026 election.
Is there any data on, I was kind of curious, you talked about the deficit or the sizes. So like if it's a $15 million deficit and you need to kind of bridge that by not renewing contracts or not giving like, raises commensurate with inflation or whatever. Is there data on like the sort of knock-on effects of that? Like you can tell that there's less economic productivity or it costs more over a longer period of time to produce the same results that you would have had like by renewing those contracts?
So I think it depends on the types of contracts. So I think what the city could do is just look at how we provide those services differently. And it may be that we don't we don't eliminate contracts, we just change our expectation on the services provided. And once we decide what services we look like, so when we created the budget, we didn't say we're going to cut basic needs services or homelessness services. We just said overall we would need to do a $16.8 million reduction in social service contracts. So now staff is working through what would those reductions look like, what organizations will be impacted, what services will be impacted, and then we could start talking about once those services are impacted, what does that look in the next 2 or 3 years if those cuts actually come into fruition. So that's some of the work that the team is doing right now to identify the impacts going forward should we do those reductions.
With the other cities around us growing and pulling in competition for population, is there any sort of competition that's going on between the city of Austin and like Utah or Kyle for annexing the territory within the ETJ, or?
So the state, the restrictions that we have on annexation is huge too because of the state laws. And so we don't annex nearly as much as we used to. Actually, we're trying to make sure areas don't want to de-annex because they have easier ways to de-annex now. I don't think there's a lot of competition for it because the state has kind of removed that ability in a lot of ways.
So you showed the operating budget
Mhm.
roads, streets. How, I know that usually we get bonds to pay for those. Where, how are those bonds being paid?
Your property taxes.
Okay.
So your property taxes are made up of two elements. The M&O rate, maintenance and operations rate, which manages our our $1.6 billion. Then it's the debt rate that pays back those bonds. And so the full amount, so the debt rate is generated because those bonds have already been approved. So whatever is calculated based on what we need to pay is the debt rate. There's no changing that. We make adjustments to that based on the bonds that are being sold at the time. The M&O is where the 3.5% cap is. And so you'll see a lot of those adjustments, that conversation about the maintenance and operations rate, but we calculate the debt rate based on the already approved bonds that are in place.
And I think I mentioned this before in class, but those are called general obligation bonds.
Yep.
Meaning they're sort of backed by the city's general revenues as
Yep.
opposed to revenue bonds, like she mentioned, the airport improvement bonds that have a specific targeted source that's earmarked for repaying them.
Thought I had it.
Last slide.
Where is it? It's part of our overall cost.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
So what kind of expenditures would you expect from like energy and water?
What kind of expenditures?
Yeah, because, well, I guess I'm more confused on the energy part. So what
Okay.
kind of expenditures, yeah.
Well, I believe they have 1,200 employees,
So salary.
salaries.
Okay.
You think about the cost of replacing poles and the conduits and all those things. So there are a lot of capital costs, but there are also operating and maintaining those things. So, you know, there are a lot of costs related to making sure that the energy is actually delivered in the right way. And so there are the conduits for that. And what Austin Energy has seen in particular is since COVID, I think their costs have gone up about 200% for the things they use to repair and to replace the system. In some cases, yes. So
Yeah, there was
they've
like
had a number of increases in the cost to provide, and they've worked really hard to kind of manage that, but we see some of that impact more on their capital side than their operating side.
Yeah, there was like a worldwide transformer shortage.
Yeah.
Remember all the supply chain stuff during the pandemic? And for whatever reason, that particular type of equipment just got.
Do like energy bills not cover then 100% of the operating costs of Austin Energy?
Energy bills cover operating costs as well as their capital plans. So it should cover their whole operating and their capital plans. However,
Including the cost of buying electricity, right? I mean, AE has to
Well,
buy electricity wholesale from
they
the
do
grid.
have to buy electricity wholesale. So there are some pass-through costs. It's not that you'll see on your bill power supply adjustment. That's a pass-through cost. From ERCOT, they have to send that and send it back to ERCOT. But your utility bill, your energy bill, that fee covers the cost of their operations as well as their capital program. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So is that all like wrapped up in the same budget though, or is that then like does your energy bill go directly to pay like for Austin Energy, or like because it's included in this whole like
It's
all the city's funds?
It's included in this because that's one of the funds that the city owns. So the city owns energy, the city owns resource recovery. This is just showing that the city operates all of this. However, Austin Energy pays for its services, its operations, its capital through the fees that you pay. Okay? I think,
I was gonna ask, like with energy, is if there's a change in like the input of energy, like I don't know if you're using natural gas and transitioning to like a different energy source, is that reflected? Could that be reflected in like in kind of output costs and like what
So I know the energy company has diversified the sources, and so they do have some solar, they do have some natural gas, and that is all calculated in how they provide the service and the rates and fees that go with it.
I have two questions. So one, whenever you're doing capital improvement projects, a lot of the times they overlap with like, you have to move power poles, you have to reduce storm sewers, which it seems like it falls in other. How does that work? Like, do the Austin Energy, they pay for their portion of that project, or is it still part of the bond and like?
So it's a coordinated effort. So we have a department called Capital Delivery Services. And so if it's a mobility bond that's happening, they're doing something on the streets, then they work to coordinate with energy and water to see if they have projects that need to be done in that space so that it can all be done at the same time. So that if we have to open up the street anyway, that's part of the mobility bond. Once they get in there, then energy and water pays for their portion of what they're fixing in there. If it's new development, the developer pays for that.
What happens, like, for example, like if it's decided that South Lamar will get redeveloped, and with that redevelopment of that street, power poles are moved, storm sewers have to be moved or whatever, and then those are, if my understanding is that those are usually paid by bonds, right? Which then you pay the debt with that portion right there. Is that the portion that is allocated or that is related to the poles and like the storm sewer and everything? Are those paid by that
So
portion, or?
if it is a bond development program that completely restructures it, if there's a package that says we're going to redo this piece, then the bond pays for that.
Okay.
Now, yeah, the bond would pay for that. And then if there are portions of it that would need to be redeveloped because they already had that plan, then the different utilities would pay for that portion that they had already planned. But if it's a new development that the city decided that it approved some new development that the city was responsible for, then that would be included in the bond package.
Just if I could abuse my professor privilege a little bit here and ask you a different kind of question, could you just say a little bit about how you got on this career path? You graduate from UT with a business undergrad degree, and what drew you into this career path? And obviously you've traveled a long way with it, you've decided to stick with it, but just, I don't know, any reflections on this as a career?
I tell everybody, just go with the journey. When I graduated from UT, I thought I was going to be a salon owner. I was going to have my own business. I come from a family. My grandmother was the first black salon owner in San Antonio. So I come from a family of business owners. And so I was like, oh, I'm just going to do that. Full candid conversation. I had my son. I needed insurance. I had already been doing some business plan work in my first job out of college. And I said, oh, they needed somebody to do business plan for Parks and Recreation. And so I applied for that job, got it, and fell in love. I am a kitchen beautician still. So I do most of my family's hair because I still love doing hair, but I just fell in love with the work. And so when I started at Park, had no idea what the city really did because that was not part of my thought of what my path was going to be. And I'll tell you all a quick story. I was in the finance team. My focus was business planning. And that 21 years on the 25th is my 21-year anniversary at the city. And that first week that I started we used to have this thing called Trick or Treat Trail at Zilker Park where all the recreation centers would go there and you just bring a canned good and you get to get all this candy. It was an amazing event. That was my first week. And my boss at the time said, everybody has to come work. It was on a Sunday. I lived in San Antonio, so I was driving back and forth. Everybody had to come work, and you need to wear a costume. And I was like, are you serious? He was like, everyone wears a costume. I had an afro. I had this big afro. I dyed it red. I put a clown. I was a clown. I walk up. No one else on the team has a costume on. And so that was my introduction to the city. And I loved it ever since. It's just been a journey. And I never, at that time, I didn't think it would be my career. But as I got more involved in PARD and started learning more about the city, started seeing more opportunities, I just kept taking those opportunities. And here I am 21 years later. And another funny story, I used to work at the budget office as an analyst. I think I joined in 2008. And then when I left and went to the health department in 2010, my now boss, he was the budget officer, and he said, Kerri, we're going to bring you back. I want you to come back. And I was like, I will never come back to the budget office. The summers are horrible. They're long. I want to do things in the summertime. I want to hang out with my family and friends. And in 2021, he was like, Kerri, you want to come back? And it was an interim opportunity because the previous officer had retired, and we needed to get through budget. And I was like, I'll come help. I'll come help. And that first budget, my husband will tell you, I would go home and cry. I was so tired. I don't know what. He was like, well, you don't have to go back. I'm not going back. I'm going to stay. And so I've been there ever since. So it's been a joy. It's been a journey and a joy.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And if anybody wants to come work for the city, we are hiring. Good positions available. Any more questions?
Maybe I may be incorrect on this, but the state of Texas's fiscal year goes to August, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the city follows the federal fiscal year, which is
October?
Is October 1st to September 30th. So
Yes.
the state goes from
September 1st.
to August 30th
Mm-hmm.
or 31st.
Mm-hmm.
Does that cause any issue?
No, because most of the funding, like if we get grants from the state, they usually don't follow either of them. Sometimes grant fiscal years start in March, and so it just depends on the funding that we get. Yeah.
I might have missed because I was a couple of minutes late, but so what, you went to UT for?
Yes, I went to undergrad at UT, but I have a bachelor's in business administration. I was going to own my own business. I had my BBA. I was going to be a big business owner. After that, I started working for a federally funded program called the Minority Business Development Center. That's how I got experience making business plans for people who want to start businesses. And then I came back and followed my husband back to Austin from Dallas, and I was like, I need a job. And so started with the city. Yep. But I am a Longhorn. I don't know if y'all went to undergrad. I know it's different when you go undergrad versus grad, but I bleed burnt orange. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll use my privilege again, and just, could you just say a little something about, you do all the civic kind of, professional, work within the profession, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the Black public administrators, with the International City County Management Association, et cetera. I don't know, just anything you would care to say about your involvement in those different organizations?
So my first organization that I joined as a professional was National Forum for Black Public Administrators, that's NFBPA. And I was introduced to that organization by one of my long-term friends and colleagues because they have a program called the Executive Leadership Institute. And that is we went to, I think, 6 different universities, Syracuse, University of Minnesota, Kansas, to learn about different aspects of public administration. So that's how I got introduced to NFBPA. Probably one of the best organizations I've ever been a part of because it just gave you a direct, in-person, real-life understanding of things that could happen, and the network is unbelievable. I can call anyone right now. I have a friend who works at the city of Baltimore. I have friends who work down in Florida who I've met through this organization who I can call and say, hey, are y'all dealing with X, Y, and Z in y'all city? How did you handle it? So that's what I really enjoy about NFBPA. GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, It gives us all the details that we need to manage the budget, to manage the finances for the city. The 17% reserve, that's a recommendation of GFOA. And so that gives you a lot of technical information about how we need to look at the city's finances and everything from procurement to accounting and reporting to budgeting. All those things are what I get from NFBPA. ICMA is the City County Managers Association, and that is more of an aspirational. I don't think I want to be a city manager or assistant city manager, but it is to learn about what happens in cities holistically. So it gives just another perspective. I always think that you should know your job, but know the people's jobs around you so you can understand what they're asking for and why they're asking for the things that they're asking. And so I participate in ICMA, not as much as the other two, but it gives me an opportunity to understand what's happening globally with cities. And then I don't know if you all are aware of LifeWorks. LifeWorks is a nonprofit organization here in Austin. I had the opportunity to join the Board of Governors in 2021. I was familiar with it because the city provides contracts through LifeWorks. And so I was familiar from my work as the financial manager at Public Health, but I wasn't familiar with the intricacies of the organization. And then I had a friend introduce me to it in 2021, opportunity to be on the Board of Governors. And it is my joy to participate and see the work that organization does to help youth and young people who are struggling with homelessness, who are maybe leaving the foster care system and trying to get their lives into a place where they can be productive. And so that is one of the things that I'm honored to be a part of that, to be part of the conversation, and to help that organization move forward in a positive way. So those are the civic things I do. I go to my church. I sing. I used to run, but I don't run much anymore.
Yeah, you sound very busy. Do we have the last question for Director Lang to close us out here?
I just have a quick one. What was the first BPA that you said?
National Forum for Black Public Administrators, NFBPA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything
I
else?
thank y'all for letting me hang out with y'all today. Any questions? I'm here to help.
Thank you so much. All right, and